Hello and welcome back to episode 340 of the Stacey West podcast. To steal one of Gary's usual intros, 340 is the number that you get when you add up the number of Stacey West podcasts that we've done so far and this one on top of it. So 339 plus 1 makes 340. That's how these intros work, right? I am Charlie. I'm your host for today, one of the usual pundits actually on the Stacey West podcast. Instead, I am on hosting duties because I am joined by Mr. Chris Lamming, the Lincoln City EFL and tactical expert.
Expert's a strong word. You do this on our other podcast, Charlie, as well. You build me up, but it gives me a lot of pressure to live up to, that is, mate. But yeah, I'm all right, thank you. How long did that intro take you to come up with, by the way? Because I wasn't expecting that.
Do you know what? Ever since Gary started doing them, I knew that the minute I was doing an intro, I kind of just felt I had to do that way. Mainly because, unlike Gary, I really can't be asked doing all of the maths to try and figure out two players who meet up to exactly make the 340 number. So it's a lot easier, I think, just doing that one. Don't you agree?
Yeah, fair enough. I suppose the answer to my question then is it's taken you weeks to think of that. Is basically literally what you're getting at.
I'm a comedic genius.
Something like that. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
So we've got a busy show though, because we've actually got 3 matches to talk about, haven't we?
We have. I mean, the title of this podcast is just a triple header because there are 3 games to talk about, as you said. Obviously, Morecambe in the Cup, and then the kids were playing on Wednesday night as well. And then we have Huddersfield back in the league. So not just 3 games, by the way, but 3 different competitions, which is quite a fun one. Probably one of the first times on the podcast as well that has happened. But yeah, Huddersfield, again, to look forward to on Saturday, which should be a great game. Obviously, Chris, you went to the Wrexham under-18s game last night. We'll talk about the game as such in a little while after we've spoken about Morecambe and such. But what was it like? Was there many people there? Because obviously I've only seen a couple of photos and such. It wasn't live streamed or anywhere, or not that I could see, anything like that. So was it a kind of nice atmosphere for an under-18s game?
Firstly, it was great. Yeah, really enjoyed going. It was well worth a £5. To be honest, I kind of got a little mixed up with the ticket prices. I thought it was a tenner, and I was more than happy to pay a tenner. So when I was only charged a £5 on the gate, I was even happier. But it was worth every penny. It was really good. There was some good football on show at times. I've got some really promising youngsters in our academy. We really have. In terms of attendance, I think there was 400 or 500 there. I don't know. It wasn't like announced specifically, but I felt it was maybe around that sort of number. So, a good turnout. You know, probably the biggest crowd that a lot of the under-18 players, bar the ones who have experienced first-team football, of course, have probably played in front of. But it's a massive step. It's a massive step. You know, the first time you play in front of a real crowd as a teenager, it's a big day, and a lot of them really rose to that. So yeah, credit to everyone that turned up. I think everyone that went really enjoyed it. I certainly did. So yeah, we're going to talk about it in a bit more depth later on. But it was a really good idea for the club to kind of really promote that and advertise it, and allow kind of regular fans to come in and watch that, because I think it really added something to the occasion. It was really good fun and really well put together.
It's funny you were saying there, like 500. It's like that's fine, isn't it? I obviously, Chris mentioned earlier on, me and Chris do a different podcast, the EFL Hub, that we record weekly as well. Make sure to go check that out if you haven't already. Cheeky little plug in there. But as I mentioned on there the other day when we recorded, this weekend I'm doing 2 games in the same day in 2 separate countries, which is quite fun. I'm really looking forward to that. As a ground hopper, I do enjoy little kind of nuggets like that. And 500 will probably be triple what the combined attendances of those 2 games is as well. So just 500 is probably quite a lot for those kids to have played in front of. But another competition. Absolutely. But another competition that often sees quite a few youth players starting in is the Virtue Motors EFL Trophy, or the EFL Virtue Motors Trophy, or whatever it is that they want to call it this week. And that leads us quite nicely into Morecambe away, which was obviously in that competition on Tuesday night. Now, Chris, I think obviously we start on this the same as we would start on any game, by taking a look at the team selection. Any surprises in there in the starting 11, first of all, for you?
The short answer to your question is no surprises. I do think the team selection and certainly the squad selection was probably impacted by the fact that the under-18s had a really important match the following night. So, some of the under-18s who maybe would have featured, I think Zayn Okoro would be probably the prime candidate. They were favoured for the really important under-18 match, which makes total sense. So I think there were more first-team players in the whole squad than there would have been if the under-18s match was a different week. But what that meant, though, is we still had plenty of changes, didn't it? As expected, Oisin Gallagher came back to play as is allowed as per the terms of his loan at Peterborough Sports. Sean Rowan played again. The guy is, I don't think gets talked about enough. I know we back Sean Rowan up quite a lot on this podcast because of what he does on the ball and how he plays. I think what isn't spoken about quite enough about Sean Rowan is the fact of he's just incredibly kind of robust, isn't he? And incredibly durable. He plays 90 minutes in almost every game, hardly ever gets injured, plays in a lot of the cup competitions as well. And obviously on the pitch offers some real balance. But Tendice played in the centre of the back three. And there were starts for other kind of fringe players as well. So Dylan Duffy getting a start in there, JJ McKiernan getting a start, which is always nice to see JJ get a start. And of course, we had Fred and Bailey Cadamartri getting starts up top as well. So, yeah, plenty of changes. I'm sure I've missed a couple there, but I think the ones that we're going to discuss in a little bit of depth have been mentioned so far, haven't they?
Yes, absolutely. Again, with you, in terms of that starting lineup, especially, there's very few kind of surprises. There was a lot of kind of talk about Oisin Gallagher on the Monday in the pre-match press conferences and such. I think Gaz did an article on it as well about the fact that we, can probably expect to see him in the games. I think I just want to touch on that for the moment before we even talk about him in that game. But overall, I think somebody like an Oisin Gallagher, who is on those loans at Peterborough Sports, in the last season or two, we've maybe seen him or a player like him of that same kind of ilk and that same kind of caliber on those loans out, maybe come in for the group stage games. As soon as we hit the knockout games, we're then only using the first team squad. Now, I just want to touch on the fact that he's now come in for a knockout stage game. That shows immediate progression, even though, we don't get to see him playing week in, week out for Peterborough Sports. It's clearly great that Michael Skubala and the whole coaching staff have so much faith in him to want to have him in when actually it's £20,000 on the line rather than £10,000 like it is in the group stage.
Good point. Yeah, I hadn't considered that, to be honest. That's a very good point. And also, I think in terms of performance as well, the fact he's been playing in a position that isn't his natural position, he's more of a number six, kind of a deeper midfielder to slot in at centre back kind of seamlessly is credible as well. But yeah, I think of all the youngsters, he's the one that we've heard about for the longest, and also feels like it's probably the closest to the first team. Again, we've seen a bit of Zayn Okoro recently as well, who's maybe a year or two younger. But yeah, I think Oisin is probably the last one of the previous batch, isn't he? That's yet to really cement himself in the first team, but is very much part of the future of this football club. Is performing incredibly well out at Peterborough Sports. I honestly feel his next step, not necessarily this season. I think he'll stay out on loan this season, whether that be it's Peterborough Sports post-January or somewhere else. But I think, providing he continues to develop at the rate he is doing, I would be very surprised if he wasn't part of the first team squad next season. But yeah, it's just good to see. Just really good to see. So yeah, we'll touch on him. He played well, unnoticeably well, if that makes sense. Like, so much so he just didn't put a foot wrong. I don't think he gave the ball away at all. He won a lot of his battles. It was a very different game, this one, than it was against Man City. Of course, it's playing against physical, seasoned professionals, and as much as Manchester City players were technically really good, didn't quite have that kind of physicality or aggression than Morecambe players did, of course. And he just dealt with it really well. He just looked like he'd been playing there for years, really. So that's credit to him, because not only did he step in and play in a men's game really well, he played out of position, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's a player that I feel like over the last couple of seasons now, we're kind of saying, okay, he's going to have an opportunity in the first team soon. And to be fair, he's getting the opportunities. Him coming back and playing in these games and then playing week in, week out in the men's game in itself in National League North is probably a better opportunity than it is just having him in the academy set or an academy setup, or maybe on the fringes of the bench in the league matches for us at the moment. So obviously it's clearly helping him come on leaps and bounds, especially if we are kind of trusting him that much. And like you say, he's impressing when he's being given those opportunities, not exactly doing anything special, but that in itself is actually a positive, because sometimes as a centre-back, you don't want to see anything special. You just want to see somebody commendable that can help secure those 1-0 victories. And of course, it was a 1-0 victory on Tuesday night. And that was all down to, on the 19th minute, Bailey Cadamarteri, effectively putting the game away, didn't he?
What a header. A great ball in, by the way, fighted by Dylan Duffy. But outstanding header. And I'm going to admit something now, and I hope this doesn't come across badly, but I'm going to be brutally honest. I've been saying privately for a while that I know a lot of Leicester City supporters have been clamouring for Bailey Cadamarteri to start more games. I imagine Bailey would like to start more games as well. And my kind of answer to a lot of people's opinions there were, and a lot of this comes around, potentially underperforming centre forwards that are playing ahead of him at times, and we've had that debate on the podcast before. We're not going to go kind of over old ground too much, but my opinion in that at no point have I thought that Bailey is a bad player. I think he's absolutely shown some real quality. However, I was still yet to be convinced of exactly how much better he may be compared to those that are playing at the moment. Is he really head and shoulders better than the players that are playing ahead of him at the moment? And as much as I'd like snippets of what I'd seen, I haven't been quite convinced just yet that he deserved to be a guaranteed starter in the league. And I'll talk a little bit on this podcast about confirmation bias, don't I? Some of us people that see, particularly Jovan Makama, someone's got it in their head that they think he's not someone that I'm massively keen on. When you spot something, whenever he makes a mistake, you go, see, there we go. But maybe you miss the things he does well. Maybe at times I'm guilty of the opposite, in that he's a player that I really want to do well. I think statistically he's shown he's doing all right. But don't get me wrong, he's just like everyone else does. He's human. He makes a mistake. Maybe I gloss over the mistakes a little bit more than I should in my mind, and I focus on the positives. We all try and keep a balance, but we're all human beings and we all have bias, as much as we try not to. And I have to say, in the early stages of this game against Morecambe, and partly it was maybe bias, and not that I want Bailey to fail, but also I want myself to be right. It's deep down, we all want that, don't we?
Of course.
He misplaced a couple of passes. He gave away a silly foul. And then on 90 minutes, he scores an absolutely outstanding header. And my kind of response was, he maybe hasn't had the best start into the overall link-up play and all-round performance. But by God, can the guy finish? He can finish. He is the only striker in our current kind of crop, bar Tyler Walker, who we've kind of got a big question mark over at the moment in terms of just fitness. He's just coming back in. So the players that's played so far this season, there's no doubt, Bailey has shown it in the opportunities he's had, albeit primarily in the cup games, that when he gets a half chance, he makes the most of it more often than maybe his teammates do. Now, I do think other players in the team have better all-round games. But I think the beauty when you play two up top is you can afford to have one striker that does that and one that kind of poaches. In all honesty, Joe Taylor last season wasn't hugely involved in build-up, was he? But he definitely finished things off. So I think I've been maybe a little bit guilty of overly backing our players and maybe underappreciating Bailey a little bit. And that wasn't necessarily conscious. But I think every single time he plays and he scores, you go, yeah, the guy can finish. And that's the one thing that is maybe has been missing from us so far this season overall. And this isn't me saying Bailey has to start every single game, but it's just me really kind of admitting that, yeah, he's making it very hard to ignore his talents in front of goal, isn't it?
He is. And look, it is in a way a nice problem to have. I think it's created a lot of debate, obviously, between Imps fans, and rightly so, because a lot of strikers, their one job is to score. When we've got a two-striker format, well, this is the thing. So when we've got a two-striker formation, that doesn't always have to be the case. And I made the argument on the podcast the other week. It was me and Ben talking about this, and it was after the Wrexham away game, and obviously that was kind of one of the biggest boiling points regarding strikers, and said at that point that, look, what we need obviously is a striker that can put the ball in the back of the net, but not just necessarily that. If other people are getting the goals as well, and I kind of linked it back at that point to Roberto Firmino back at Liverpool. He was never the top goal scorer, but what he did and his work meant that his two wingers either side of him were able to go ahead and get the goals by everything that he was doing in the middle of the park. Now, that's absolutely fine if we have a striker who does very similar work. Ben House, for me, is one of the best off-the-ball strikers in the division. I've always loved Ben House ever since he started playing that kind of role, and I think he is our best striker out of the whole crop. But is he that much of a goal scorer necessarily? Probably not. But he's able to create opportunities for everybody else, which again is something that I'm a big fan of. The only problem is, I think that some people were starting to see was that, okay, yes, our strikers aren't getting the goals, but they were maybe also struggling to see that we were getting the goals from elsewhere, and I understood that viewpoint. So actually then at that point, Bailey Cadamarteri, if he were to come in and he were to kind of be bagging the goals that he's shown so far, that he can do from those half chances, is that maybe what we're missing? Him and then, let's say, a Ben House as a two-striker formation. Now, I just want to pick up on something as well you mentioned there about favouring our own players. And I do this. I do this a lot. I love a lone player. I fall in love with lone players. We all do it. It's the biggest cardinal sin in football, but we all do it. But at the same time, I feel like a lone player kind of has to be considerably better than our own counterpart at the same position. I'm with you. So far, although I've been impressed with Bailey when he started and when he's had opportunities, I've never seen him as so far and above better than his counterparts. But at the same time, does there become a point where results and performances do have to take priority, and even 5% better than his counterpart is good enough, even though maybe we're hoping for 10% if we're then sacrificing the progression of one of our own players? At some point, do we have to realise that short term does matter just as much as long term?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things here. And you know what? I think both opinions are allowed to be correct at the same time. And I think because football's so fluid, isn't it? It's almost impossible to say, yes, this is what we should do all the time. But I think there's a couple of things here. Number one, in that, isn't it nice to have this discussion, though? To have the discussion in that which of all of our millions of strikers that we have should be playing. That's a privilege in itself to be able to have that discussion, isn't it? Is to have a question to ask in that regard, because we haven't had that for years. But of course, when that brings itself or kind of raises its head and that question is posed, there's going to be differing of opinions. And yeah, it depends what side you kind of sit on, doesn't it? So on one hand, if the centre forwards are facilitating goals, then it doesn't matter who scores them. I think that's my overriding opinion here. But also, they're generally the players that are closest to the goal, should expect them to get their fair share. And then there's the other side of things in terms of our shape and our system. We tend to play 3-5-2, but we also tend to focus our play primarily down the flanks. So you tend to find that we have a three-man kind of combination of the wing-back, the outside centre midfielder, and the centre forward that's drifting wide. So in build-up, our centre forwards are often find themselves out in wide positions. I do think Jovan Makama and Ben House are our best players in that style build-up. But when there's the ball in the 18-yard box that needs finishing off, I think from what we've seen so far this season, the most natural finisher that we have is Bailey Cadamarteri. It is maybe a little bit horses for courses at times because they do have their own strengths and their own abilities. I think it's also worth pointing out that they're not all jack of all trades and master of them all, are they? They have the things that they have strengths at. They also have weaknesses in other areas. But I think I probably am going to jump on the bandwagon to an extent in saying that I think Bailey maybe does deserve to start a few more games than he is doing in the league. I think he's shown enough in the opportunities he's been getting to justify that. And that isn't even me saying that the other guys are particularly underperforming significantly. I just think, you want to be rewarded when you play well. And the EFL trophy is a perfect opportunity to be given opportunities, isn't it? To be given a chance to impress. Every time Bailey's been given a chance in that competition, he's taken it. And he's taken it a few times when he's been given a significant chance in the league. So, yeah, I have to say, I think he maybe justifies a start soon. When that will be, who that will be against, I'm not sure. In all seriousness, Wouldn't surprise me if it was this week against Huddersfield, because I feel that Huddersfield will want to attack us and there may well be space to exploit in behind, which is where Bailey will thrive. So we'll see. But yeah, I think it's a valid conversation to have, isn't it? But I think it's also worth saying that both opinions in regards to one of them should be a goal scorer or both of them can facilitate. Both of those opinions can be right at the same time, and it can depend not even game by game, but actually during the same game. You might want to make those different changes depending on the situation. So, but does he deserve to play more than he is? Yeah, probably.
Yeah, probably agree with that. And I think there's kind of one more point on this, and I'm going to kind of caveat this before I go on to say exactly what it is I want to say. That our football club would never, will never in the future get a player on loan where there is a minimum mandated number of games. I don't really think it happens in football anyway, but, Jez George and other members of the club staff have come out publicly and said that is never something that we will ever do. I remember a couple of years ago, there was a massive rumour around Jack Diamond. Obviously, this was before everything actually came out with Jack Diamond. He wasn't really playing too well, but he kept on playing week in, week out. And everyone was like, oh, it's because Sunderland is saying that we have to. It's in the contract and all of this. And the club like, no, that's just daft. But there is also a point here that Bailey Cadamarteri's future at Lincoln City could also be under a little bit of a question mark in coming into the January transfer window. And let's be honest, if a club are going to recall a striker, the amount of games that he's played is obviously going to be a factor in that to see exactly how he's going to be progressing. Now, I'm not saying that Michael Skubala or anybody in the coaching staff or anyone in the club is saying, oh, well, now we're going to start playing Bailey because of that or anything like that. But at some point, even subconsciously, that is going to factor into the conversation. So potentially, now if he is then given these couple of games and he is able to thrive, obviously then there's a question mark. First of all, is it going to be too little too late sort of thing in terms of whether or not we can keep him for after January? But also then it could be the opportunity to show Sheffield Wednesday exactly what we're able to bring him over the next 6 months.
Yeah, January is going to be really interesting, is it? I can foresee it's been really busy and I can foresee it's been really quiet. I think it depends a little bit on the market and what happens with certain players. Obviously, that goes without saying. But yeah, it's an interesting one because I think there's a lot up in the air. Yet at the same time, things could stay quite kind of similar to they are, depending on some of the questions that are posed at the moment. But we're going to discuss generally in a bit of depth, I imagine, in the coming weeks. So I'm going to kind of leave that for now because there's a point that you made earlier before we move on to our next discussion. The point you made earlier in that, we're all for progression. And I like to think that on this podcast, we're quite, I'm maybe speaking for myself here more so, but quite good at seeing the big picture. Maybe not always the best at seeing the immediate. And like you said, sometimes the short term is just as important as the long term, and you need to get pick up results now. So, yeah, I think that's enough on Bailey Cadamarteri, but read into that what you will. We'll see. I'm not saying he should definitely start every game, but I'm saying that maybe he does deserve to get a little bit more of a chance now, particularly if we're in a situation where we need a goal. I think he's a sort of player that we've seen has proven that he can get one. One other player that I think I just want to discuss from the fixture against Morecambe was JJ McKinnon. Oh, he's having some bad luck, isn't he? He's having some bad luck, the guy, because he's on a 4-year deal, which is good, which means he's going to be here for a long time. We haven't seen the best of JJ yet. I imagine he wasn't signed to be a guaranteed starter immediately. He's very much here for the long term. But JJ's a professional footballer and wants to play football, just like they all do. And he's had a couple of knocks recently. Has been given even when he's come on as a sub, he hasn't really been given a huge amount of time. They're just other players that are ahead of him at the moment. Jack Moylan really, really improving and cementing a place in the starting 11 more often than not has kind of gone against JJ. It's no fault with him. Jack's just taken his chance when he was given it. But of course, he came off in this game with a calf injury. So in one of those games where he was going to have the opportunity to play probably 90 minutes to potentially impress, and he had to come off injured. So hopefully it's not too long, but it's just a real shame more than anything, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we want, or we've got such great competition in so many areas of the pitch, haven't we? And it's kind of, we spoke about it in the summer of what a great problem it is to have. But then actually, when there's one player who we've liked when we've seen him so far, I haven't had anything to dislike about what I've seen from JJ McKinnon so far. But at the same time, he simply hasn't really had those same opportunities, or those that he has, whether maybe on the training pitch behind the scenes, we don't know. Potentially, he just hasn't quite been able to grasp those in the same way that other players, like we've said, with Jack Moylan, have been able to do. So, big kind of shame for him. Obviously, it's a bit of a shame for the team, especially with the kind of in and out of fitness issues and such. But if he's fit and he's then pushing the rest, I'm a big fan of that again, because we're going to want players ready and raring to go on the bench. So hopefully he'll come back, he'll try and grab his first opportunity he's given, and again really grab the ball by its horns in those situations. And I think as well, what's kind of positive now, do you know what? It was in the first few lines as well of Gaz's write-up after the Morecambe game. He just spoke about the fact that you lose that game, it doesn't really matter. We shrug our shoulders, we say, who cares? So what? It's the Virtue Motors Trophy. You win that game, you're buzzing. Get in. First of all, we've won a game of football, always great as Lincoln City fans. But second of all, we've got the extra bit of money in the coffers, and we've got another game at least to be playing in a competition where we're able to experiment a little bit with team selection. So potentially there's another guaranteed, if fit, start, if you like, for JJ McKinnon, ahead of maybe some of his other midfield counterparts, no matter who our opposition is. And that's, again, always a nice opportunity to have. And that's one of the few things that I think we've, from maybe a bit of a selfish point of view, I know my feeling on this especially, is having a larger squad as we do now actually means I'm a bit more of a fan of the EFL Trophy than I ever was, because it means we're able to give opportunities to different players. But look, that was... Yeah, look, we've been talking for 26 minutes and we're at effectively half-time of the Morecambe game. We're not going through the actual game in full detail. Just a couple more things that I think we need to touch on. In fact, two more players I think that we specifically need to touch on, don't we, Chris? The 67th minute and the 74th minute. We had two returning players. I think the first one, probably a little bit more significant overall. I think it was probably a little bit nicer to see overall, was Tyler Walker coming back onto the pitch. We're talking about players with bad luck. Tyler Walker is probably front and centre of that, isn't he? But great to see him back, wasn't it, Chris?
Yeah, he's had some rotten luck, of course. And I think a lot of Lincoln City supporters have written him off. And I think what that does is it just completely reduces any expectation on Tyler Walker, doesn't it? So I think what happens now is we've almost got a bonus striker. That's kind of how I'm seeing it. And we know if Tyler Walker is fit and firing that he is an excellent player at this level. I think he looked pretty sharp when he came on, albeit he had a 20-minute cameo. Considering he's been away for such a long time, I think he looked pretty sharp. He got a shot away. He looked to get on the ball. Yeah, I bet the best version of Tyler Walker is a superb footballer. We know that. We all hope it happens, but there's no pressure on Tyler now, I think. The pressure will be coming from himself, I think, rather from anyone on the outside. But yeah, it's just a really good thing to see. I'm equally pleased to see Tom Bayliss back. I think Tom Bayliss has been he was really impressive in the opening part of the season. It was really unfortunate that he's been out for a little while. Of course, there are other players that have taken their chances. Again, primarily Jack Moylan has really taken his chance in that more attacking midfield role. So Tom's going to have a bit of a battle on his hands to get back into the team. But that's what you want. We've mentioned in terms of the squad depth, we want that competition for places. And other than at centre back, we've got it everywhere else on the pitch, which is fantastic. You know what's interesting though? Despite us having what probably feels like the biggest and most competitive squad than we've had probably in my lifetime, but for years and years and years at least, we've only actually used 25 different players this season in the league. And there's only two teams that have, I can't remember who they are now, but I looked at it yesterday, but there's only two teams that have actually used fewer. So even though we've got a nice big squad, we've got competition for places, most teams have used more players than we have, which is, that really surprised me, to be honest. But what else? Anything else on Morecambe? Oh, I suppose, yeah, we won. That we haven't actually got to that point, have we, at the end? We finished. It finished 1-0. We spoke about the goal, went off on a tangent, but it finished 1-0 and we won. In all honesty, not a huge amount happened after that. Morecambe had a goal disallowed for offside. It was offside, despite the linesman taking quite a long time to give it. It was clearly offside. And ultimately, it just kind of felt like job done, really, at 90 minutes. And that's pretty much what Michael Skibala said. The aim of this game was to try and get through if we can, put a team out to try and win. But more importantly than not, don't risk any injuries of key players that we can't afford to lose. It was unfortunate that we actually had to bring Ethan Arahan on for JJ McKiernan because of JJ's injury, because that's a player that we absolutely don't want to be losing. But everyone other than JJ seemed to have come out of that unscathed. So that was another positive. Moving on into Saturday. So is there anything else from Wrexham? Not Wrexham, that's next. Anything else from Morecambe, Mr. Beeston?
No, not really. Look, we're through. We've got £20,000, I believe it is, you get for winning in that stage of the competition. I think, is it the round of 16 next, if I'm not mistaken? So I believe the draw for that is probably tomorrow. I think they're normally Fridays. So look, we'll get somebody. We'll talk about it on the podcast. We'll look forward to the game, sort of. We'll watch the game. We lose, we won't mention it. If we win, we'll sit here and talk about it for half an hour like we have done for Morecambe. But no, I think that's kind of the crux of it. And I think, there are kind of nice little positive stories to take out of the game, even notwithstanding the performance as a whole as well. So yeah, really kind of pleased with the Morecambe game and the victory overall. Now, you said there, Chris, that we have used 25 players so far this season. Now, a team who have used 26 players are Wrexham, and they may have used some youth players in that as well, although their average age is rather high. And it's actually their youth team who we faced yesterday. You were saying you were there. I realised I'm doing this whole segue, but we've actually already mentioned Wrexham earlier on, and you literally just mentioned it then. So there's not really much point. Chris, yesterday's game, good victory, good result. Your thoughts on the performance as a whole as well?
Yeah, so for anyone that wasn't aware, under-18s were playing against Wrexham in the third round of the FA Youth Cup. Game was at Sincil Bank on the main pitch with a decent crowd, though, as mentioned earlier, 500-ish, I think, just looking, it looked around that. So a good crowd nonetheless. Now, I think there's a little bit of extra buzz around this because the Wrexham documentary cameras were there as well. So it means that there's an element of potentially being featured on that. I think as much as we'll all have our individual opinions on the documentary, the fact that the cameras were there just adds something to the occasion, doesn't it? And it was quite funny because after a quarter of an hour or so, and complete dominance, by the way, Lincoln City under-18s dominated the early exchanges. Yeah, it's just so strong in comparison to Wrexham. I'm not exaggerating when I say that they hardly had a kick. They really didn't. It was really, really impressive. And something that hasn't happened too often this season is when Lincoln City side is on top, they scored a goal to make it count. And it was actually a little bit of a scrappy goal. And he had a well-worked short corner to the edge of the box. Little bit of a goalmouth scramble and poked in by Takara Weaver. But it was a goal that was fully deserved from the early exchanges. It was really, really impressive. It was really impressive. I have to say the game maybe evened up a little bit after that. Zaina Kuro scored a fantastic goal by all accounts just before half time. I'd actually gone for a wee at that moment and missed it.
Surely not, Chris.
I know. Well, that might surprise you actually, because this is something that's quite renowned in the seats around me. In that I normally need at least 2 wees during 90 minutes, and so normally at some point in the first half and at some point in the second half, I need to relieve myself. And my Joe, who I sit next to, mentioned a couple of weeks ago, says, "You must have missed so many goals looking back." And I was like, "No, you know what? No." And I remembered, I said to him at the time, "I've never missed a goal." And then I remembered last night, I have missed a goal once before. And it was Welling at home many years ago. Jack Muldoon scored to make it 1-0. It was a game where Welling hadn't really bothered us at any point. I went downstairs, went for a wee, came back up, kept watching. I was on my own, so I wasn't with any friends that was just chatting to. Was watching the rest of the game. Obviously heard no commotion or anything. I think we scored in the first half, though I'm not 100% sure, but I think we scored in the first half. And it was about 75 minutes in, I then noticed the scoreboard and it said 1-1. And at some point, Welling had scored and I just completely missed it. I had no recollection of the goal, had no idea it had happened. So I was watching the game as if it was 1-0 up, but actually it was 1-0 at the time. So yes, anyway, we digress. But by all accounts, it's a great goal by Zena Koro, but I missed it. And then not long into the second half, it was 3-0. And Daniel van der Pey swiveled nicely about 6-7 yards out, once again by fantastic work from Zaina Koro. And from that point, Wrexham actually got themselves back into the game, even though they never really looked like they would. They fought hard. They did not no one can criticise their endeavour, but it did actually look like Lincoln City players were a little bit more tactically aware, a little bit more probably physically developed as well, and in all honesty, just a bit better overall. And that's not just being biased. That was just watching the game, but it was nice to see. Certainly, Wrexham got a couple of goals back, and it was nervy for all of a couple of minutes. Then Lincoln got a penalty. Zayn Okoro, cool as you like, made it 4-2 and kind of cemented it. So yeah, really, really good performance overall. Lincoln started and ended both halves really well, with a little bit of a lull in the middle of both halves, in all honesty. But young players don't always tend to perform consistently for a full 90 minutes. First team players don't, but it was really good. I think the only other thing to mention is just who stood out. And we've already seen him once, but twice this season. But Zayn Okoro looked a foot above. He looked every inch like a first team player playing in an under-18s game. To be honest, he looked really, really threatening. We played kind of a 3-4-3 sort of shape with two narrow players in behind the striker, and Zayn played either side of that throughout the game and was equally threatening on both sides. He was just really good, just really, really good. But some other players that we might not have heard of or heard so much of that stood out. Charlie Parks at centre back was basically like watching a younger version of Paudie O'Connor. He won everything, which was really impressive. And Denny in central midfield was, just seemed to be a step ahead in regard to his vision and seeing passes that maybe others potentially wouldn't do at that sort of level. And Dakara Weaver scored a goal and was just quite sharp throughout the game as well. And that's not to say that other players didn't impress, but they're the ones that really stood out for me. But you can see certainly why Zayn is involved in and around the first team at the moment, because he really stood out. So yeah, it was just a really good night for the club, to be honest. I think it was treated as a proper match. There was a proper team sheet that came out. Obviously, we weren't over in I forget what it's called now. What I know is the St Andrew stand. Last season was the Serenity stand. We weren't actually in that stand. We was in the GBM, or as most of us will know, as the Co-op stand, which made it feel a bit more like a proper match, because that stand was open as well. So yeah, it was just a really good evening for the football club, to be honest. I was delighted to go. It was I'm really pleased I went. Really pleased I made the effort. It was well worth the £5.
Good, even though it could have been £10 until at least that's what you thought it was going to be.
At any point, apparently, it couldn't. Just in my head.
If I was Gaz, I'd have got you to pay for my ticket as well, then, seeing as you thought you were already paying a tenner.
I'm sure I could have managed that for you, mate.
No, look, I think I agree with you. Obviously, I didn't get to watch the game yesterday. I've seen obviously some brief highlights and such. Really seems positive again. And do you know what, we kind of fall into this trap, don't we? When I say we, I just mean football fans in general. I'm looking at our academies, seeing a whole squad of players win a game and thinking, okay, so many of those are going to come up to the first team. Of course, most of them won't. The aim, I know at Lincoln City, is obviously to have some come up into the first team, but the aim is to at least make them professional players at some part, in some area of the pyramid, whether that's with us, whether that's a league or two below, or hopefully a league or two higher down the line as well. So it's great that somebody like, for example, Zayn Okoro, who has come into the senior squad, played a couple of times and, had a couple of cameo appearances and such, has then been able to go ahead and impress back in the under-18s. And obviously he'll have a little bit more experience playing in front of a crowd than the rest. But obviously it clearly didn't seem to faze them, which is great. And also huge credit to the football club, by the way, for treating it, as you just said there, exactly like it was a full match. And I know lots of fans, yourself included, obviously, gave it the whole full midweek evening game match day experience, which is just a really nice kind of little touch for the under-18s to kind of experience that, rather than playing up at the EPC or anything like that. Although the facilities and such up there are great, obviously there is nothing like playing under the lights at Centrebank, especially for a Lincoln City youth player. So I'm really kind of glad that the football club decided to kind of fully invest in giving them that experience and giving fans the experience to be able to witness all of that. So obviously, huge credit to that. Right, we are going to take a very short ad break because I totally forgot that we haven't done one so far. And when we get back, we will take a little look ahead this time to Saturday's game against Huddersfield.
Shall we say hello to YouTube for a moment? Hello, YouTube.
We should.
How are we doing? One thing on here from Richard, Richard Godson, they said it was nice to watch two teams numbered from 1 to 11. Oh, I 100% agree with you there. I am a man of tradition when it comes to shirt numbers. I suppose the only contentious question is, should your holding midfielder be number 6 or number 4? Because it's known as a number 6 role. I call it the 6 role, but actually in English football, historically, it should be a number 4. And everywhere in the world, it's because it from the old kind of systems into the new ones, how that was adopted across the world is different. But in English football, traditionally, the holding midfielder is number 4, despite it being known as a 6 role these days. And I'm guilty of saying it. But yes, Richard, I agree with you. Numbers 1 to 11 in a starting 11 is, it's beautiful. I couldn't tell you the last time that was seen in a first team match.
No, I believe there was one Premier League team who either did it or got very, very close to doing it last season or the season before. And I think there was a stat. I think there was a stat that it was something like the first time in however many years, and it was a lot of years, that had actually happened in the Premier League, which
very interesting.
It's the death of English football that isn't every single week. It is not good enough. But no, I agree. I do like those little kind of things. Right, let's get back to it. All right then, and welcome back. So I did say there we are going to be diving straight into Huddersfield. And what we are going to do to start off is we're going to take a little listen to Ben, who has been chatting with our Huddersfield Town counterpart, the podcast, and he takes that chance. And he's been talking to Cossie from their podcast. And you can take a little listen to what they have to say now.
How much of an impact have the new guys made? And then obviously let's talk about Lass a little bit as well.
Yeah, that's a weird thing. Them two guys have, Sorensen definitely made an impact in the first month or so before he's got injured, but Anthony Evans has barely featured, mate. He's injured now with a bruised toe, but he kind of fell out of favour with Duff. So we've hardly seen anything of him. And obviously, Bristol Rovers player of the season last season, and their fans give him a standing ovation when he came on as sub. I think it might have been his last game, to be honest with you, about a month back. But yeah, Lass Sorensen, fantastic. He was one really burst onto the scene, kind of caught our eye. Wing back, obviously Michael Duff kind of likes to play a 3-5-2, so he was, fantastic going forward. Honestly, every single goal that we seem to score in the first month or two, he were a Lass Sorensen assist as well. So I don't know if they do fantasy leagues in League One, but if you had Sorensen in there, you would have get there. And yeah, I think the fans touched him. But then all of a sudden, I think a few teams had worked us out a little bit, hence that shocking run we had in September as well. And Sorensen was targeted, and his defensive work left a lot to be desired, which I think kind of took him out of the squad. Michael Duff, it's almost like kind of worked with him in that as well. And then he got injured, and we've not. I don't think he's far away from getting back. To be honest, he might even be on our bench on Saturday. I think he played a B team game in the week. I could be wrong, but. So, yeah, you might see him kind of warming up and down towards your away. And what kind of reception will he get? Will he get a good one, or will he? Cause it's a bit of a weird rivalry linking us. So there seems to be a bit of edge really. And I don't know if it just comes back, not even to that playoff game, but to that offside thing. I'm old enough to remember it. But it's
not offside. That I was hoping we're going to get through it for that without mentioning that offside. God, that was farcical. But no, I mean, in terms of Lass, if he gets anything other than an incredibly warm reception, I would be very surprised.
Well, can I add something really quickly? There is fantasy football in League One and League Two. EFL fantasy is really good, and if you're not playing it, you should. It's brilliant. And if you haven't spotted it, Gary and I do a show on here where we play against each other at fantasy football each week. We missed a week last week due to schedules. We've just recorded it before I recorded this podcast, and yeah, it's good. I'm 10-6 up and it's fantastic. So I thought I had to pop that in there as quickly as I could. Sorry to interrupt there, Charlie, but I couldn't help myself.
The irony being you interrupted exactly what I was about to lead you into and give you the opportunity to say anyway as soon as you said it. Absolutely. So, yeah. And look, I think we'll kind of kick off with Lass Sorensen before we kind of talk about Huddersfield as a team and what we can kind of expect, because obviously that's what's been mentioned now. I mean, Ben, probably fair enough at the end there, what he was saying. You would expect a warm reception. Saying that, there was plenty of boos directed at Alex Mitchell on Saturday, which, obviously much of it probably jovial. And I think Alex probably absolutely revelled in the fact that people were booing him because he very much had a bit of a smile on his face when it happened. But there's a chance that could happen again for Lars Sørensen at the weekend. But he has kind of had a bit of a weird start to his Huddersfield Town career, hasn't he? Again, started off really positively. Huddersfield fans were lauding him as one of the best wing backs in League One, and how on earth did Lincoln let him go to another team in the same division, sort of thing. And then he seemed to, again, like was kind of said there, fall out of favour a little bit. And obviously now has had a bit of an injury hit time, so probably quite a big sort of festive period coming up for him if he is coming back into it. But obviously we know the kind of danger that he can have if he is on the pitch at all, don't we, Chris?
Yeah, firstly, to answer the question is why did Lincoln let him go? It's because Huddersfield paid us lots of money. They paid what we valued him at. But none of us were happy to see Lars go. I think we all understood why he did, but we was all upset to see him leave, not just because of what he did on the pitch, but because of how he conducted himself off it. And I think, to be honest, it's the off it. As good as he was on the pitch, it's his demeanour off it, I think, that really allowed fans to warm to him. So I'm with Ben. I'd be incredibly surprised to see anything other than an incredibly warm reception for Lars, and he's earned that. Just quickly, Alex Mitchell last weekend. I think most of there wasn't many boos, in fairness. But those that were there, I think I agree with you. I think they were probably a little tongue in cheek. But Alex did his best to play the bad guy, didn't he? He spent the majority of the game. He played really well, by the way. It was a really one of a strong performer in quite a poor Charlton side, but he spent the majority of the game trying to wind up Joe McCarmer and Ethan around, which didn't really work for either of them. But that was clearly his intention.
It's ironic because, as far as I'm aware, he's also good friends with them. So
that's probably why.
That probably allows that kind of extra level than maybe any other player can get away with, especially with the likes of Ethan Erraghan. Because you can imagine, I'm sure Alex probably got away with a little bit more than some of the other players could have done in League One if they turn around and say anything to Ethan. I don't think I'd dare have the bottle to say some of the things other players might say to him on the pitch.
Yeah, maybe so. But yeah, on Lars, it's been a shame for him. As much as he's gone to a rival, if you will, in our league, someone at least who we're going to be competing with. I struggle to see Huddersfield as a real, genuine rival in terms of, like in the league, they're a team that should be performing. Or in terms of a league position, I know that they've got themselves back up now, but at the start of the season, they started slowly. But I think all of us pre-season expected them to be right up there. They've made some really sensible acquisitions for this level. And I really expected them to fly, and only really Birmingham stopped them, to be honest, in terms of the league table. And they started slowly. But I think because of that, I wanted Lars to do really well. Even though they're in our league, I still really wanted Lars to do well, because we all loved him. He was a brilliant servant to the club. Got a really good fee for him. He owes us nothing off the back of that. I wished him well, but I have to say I obviously don't wish him and Huddersfield Town very well this Saturday. Every other week's fine, but just not this one. And of course the return leg later in the season. But it's going to be a tough game, this one, isn't it, Charlie? They're on a really good run.
They are, and they're a really good side. Obviously, I think we all knew that Huddersfield were going to be one of those teams that are going to be favourites to be in and around those automatic promotion spots. You've got them and you've got Birmingham, and obviously now Wickham have very much, if you like, come out of nowhere to be in and around that kind of fighting top end pack as well. And you just know that there's a kind of different level of quality to those teams. As much as we talk about how close this League One can be, there is a massive gulf between the top end of the division and the bottom end. A Huddersfield to a Burton, and that shows. That shows in the stats as well. But it also shows actually how tough that kind of top 6 or 7 is, because in most of their attacking metrics, they kind of sit 4th, 5th, maybe sometimes 3rd, maybe sometimes as low as 7th. And again, that kind of just shows that, play styles aside, they are consistent in where they are compared to the rest of the division. But there are certain things that certain teams are just simply doing better than them. Certain things that certain teams obviously simply aren't. But both defensively and offensively, they are really strong in both ends of the pitch. Look, Chris, I'm sure you would have had a little bit more of a look, if you like, as to how exactly they set up in their kind of play style. What is it that we can do to kind of be able to best, again, the fact that they are strong in both areas of the pitch?
Yeah, it's going to be tough. I think there's no beating around the bush here. It's going to be really tough. And just on Huddersfield in general, before we touch on your question directly, in that despite their pre-season expectations, and certainly from us, I think from a lot of pundits, a lot of us expected a really strong season from Huddersfield Town. I think the fact they had a difficult start, really inconsistent start to the season, their recent run's probably gone under the radar a little bit. It's been overshadowed a little bit by Wickham coming, as you mentioned, kind of surprising everybody and being as good as they've been and as consistent, winning so many games of their recently. And I think Huddersfield's almost equally as good run has been maybe overshadowed and therefore forgotten about a little bit. But they've quietly gone from being kind of mid-table, not really a lot going on, arguably underperforming, to being incredibly consistent, really high-performing team. So in their last 10 games, they've only lost one. That was 10 matches ago, and it was a 1-0 win, loss away at Birmingham City. Since then, they have won all but 2 of their league matches and have won 4 on a bounce. So they are consistently performing really, really strongly. So things to look out for in regards to just, again, stats. Not going to go too heavy on these, but I think it does give a picture here, because you rightly point out that all of the attacking metrics, they're in the top 6 for all of them. And sometimes you'll see a club that's like really good at one particular element, but maybe falling down on others. Like in terms of the attacking metrics, they're top 6 for pretty much everything. I think one thing that is worth pointing out, though, is second best defence in the league in regard to goals conceded, but maybe not amazing in regard to goal scoring, but they've had the highest number of big chances in the whole league, but they've also missed the most big chances in the whole league. Now, you can read that in 2 ways, can't you? One of that you can read in that, well, that they don't take the chances that they should get as often as they should. So that's a good thing. But also at some point you think, well, if they're creating the chances, at some point they're going to go in. That's what the conversation we had about our own performances in the last couple of weeks, isn't it? So I think what's interesting is that they've had 49 big chances in their league matches so far. The team in second behind them has had 48, so it's quite close. They've missed 36 of those 49 big chances. And Stockport in second, so they've missed the second most, but it's 28, it's 8 fewer. So that's actually quite a big red flag. It's probably the only red flag I've found, in all honesty, in that they haven't been as clinical as they would like to have been, despite still coming out on the right side of results in the last 10 games or so. They're 6th for possession, but only 52%. And in terms of how that possession looks on the pitch, I think this links with us a little bit, because they actually, in terms of action zones on their pitch, they are ranked lowest in the league, joint lowest with us, in that only 26% of the play in their matches takes place in their own third of the pitch. And that's all play, both teams involved, and both us and Huddersfield are the team that had just the ball is in our own thirds, the least amount. Now, that obviously can't be consistent for this game, because one team's going to have more than the other at some point. But I think it's a style. What that shows is that as much as they have decent possession, they don't force possession, maybe like Birmingham do. They do try and play out, but they don't force playing out. They could be quite adaptable, as is to be expected in a Duff side. I think he's always been quite adaptable in that regard. But I think it's interesting that those two were kind of quite close together on that. We're actually quite close together on a lot of metrics other than results, to be honest. So to be honest, what I think here is Huddersfield are a very good version of us. They're a similar, not exactly the same, but a similar type of team as to how we want to be. But they are a team that's been put together with a far higher budget than ours has, and has got a slightly older average age, not massively in fairness, but slightly older average age, slightly more experienced. But they're probably what we aspire to be, I would say, in a lot of ways. I think it's going to be tough, mainly because of this one factor though, which is set pieces. So Huddersfield have scored the 5th most goals from set pieces, which are in 9. Now we obviously have scored the most. We've scored 12 goals from set pieces, which is a huge number compared to anyone else in League One, which of course is a massive threat. We know that's probably our biggest threat is set pieces, which is fantastic. However, Huddersfield have conceded the fewest goals from set pieces all season. Only conceded 2 goals all season from set pieces. So our big strength that we've been able to rely upon to give us goals, even when in open play we haven't been taking our chances or creating a huge amount when we'd like to, we've still been able to look back and rely on set pieces to an extent. In this match, as good as we are at set pieces, they're also good at defending them. So it's almost like the unstoppable force versus the immovable object when it comes to our offensive set pieces. So that'll be a really interesting factor, because this is probably going to be our biggest test in regard to offensive set pieces. because they're the best team in the league at keeping them out ultimately. So we'll see how good are we really. So it'd be really nice if we could capitalise from a set piece. But to be honest, everything else is really similar, even setup wise. That they play a back three with two wing backs. They either play with one or two in front of the back three, just like we have been recently. We've played just Ethan on his own. In the most recent league game, we played Ethan with Jack ahead. They've kind of flitted between 3-4-3 and 3-5-2, but ultimately they attack down the flanks quite regularly. Only about 15-16% of their chances come from the centre. That's almost identical to us again. So yeah, style-wise, it's two very similar sides going up against each other, one in better form than another, in all honesty. So I don't want to be too negative here, but I'd be delighted with a 0-0. Absolutely delighted with a 0-0.
Won't be 0-0 because it's not lunchtime kickoff. You know the rules, Chris. That's next week when we play Reading. Remember?
Silly me.
That's the 0-0 draw. No, look, it's gonna be really interesting. And football's all about those fine margins, isn't it? And like you said there, we are two very, very similar sides, but they're 8 points above us. Those 8 points, 8 points is not a fine margin. But what's the fine margin is they're able to, or they at least have been able over the last 10 games or 9 games, been able to get the results that their performances probably deserve. That's probably been our biggest criticism over the last, was it 6 or 7 games with not winning the league now? I think it might be 7 after Charlton. 6 games after Charlton. Mm-hmm. So that's probably been our biggest criticism at Lincoln, is the fact that we've been playing well, we've been having the performances on the whole. Obviously, there's 1 or 2 games in there where you say, actually, we maybe haven't been great, but we've just been unable to quite get over the line to get those results, which is obviously something that Huddersfield have been able to do on top of those performances, which again makes Saturday, potentially it's going to be those intangibles and the mental aspects of the game, them in great form, us on less so great form, potentially just as big of a contributor than what to the game as to what style of play maybe is as well.
Yeah, I don't like to be too pessimistic, as most people know. So I'm generally the positive one on the whole. But I'm quite. It's a tough game. I think we have to be realistic. It's a tough game, and if we lose this, I don't think that's a time for us to be overly concerned, providing that we play okay. And I think we have to be really accepting of the fact that Huddersfield are genuinely good and their budget is well above ours, and they should be good. But we're not scared of anyone in this league. I think Michael Skibella mentioned that himself, is that on our day we can match anyone in this league. Even Birmingham to an extent, though I do think they're going to end up being head and shoulders above everybody. But bar them, I don't think there's been anyone that I've watched us play against and thought, wow, they are significantly better than us. So they'll be really interesting in that regard. But I don't think this is a match to judge whether we're in a really sticky situation or whether we're okay or not. I don't think this match is going to give us a definite answer there. My opinion, I agree with you, what you mentioned earlier, is that we're okay on the whole. Performances generally are fine. Again, we know what we can improve at, but we're fine on the whole. We've been unlucky in a lot of games recently. But there's been a frustration, which is we haven't been taking our chances, or we haven't been scoring when we've been on top in games. And then you concede a goal, and then that changes the whole dynamic of the match. So, and that is something that Huddersfield have been doing better than us recently, and you have to credit them for that. However, I'm with Michael here. We know on our day, we can hold our own against anybody in this league. And I mentioned this when we did the podcast on Monday night with Gaz reviewing the Charlton match. And yeah, this is I suppose the positive element of the negativity, because one side of it is run a bad run. It feels like we're on a bad run. It feels like we're struggling to score. We've mentioned the things that we're struggling at, but I mentioned this to Gaz on Monday. If I was analysing Lincoln City's run as a neutral, as if like we've just previewed Huddersfield, if I was doing that, but as if the fixture was against Lincoln City, what would I predict from Lincoln City in the coming weeks is that overall, over the last 6, 7, 8 matches, performances have been, on the whole, decent in all the metrics that I would normally look at to gauge overall performance, which shows long-term trajectory. It's pretty positive. So my opinion in regards to how is it going to go long-term would be, they're fine. At some point, the balls that aren't quite dropping will drop in. All these things tend to even themselves out over the season. Actually, the underlying performances are okay. They're being better than their opposition in lots of the metrics. don't worry, that they're going to be all right. But I'm a Lincoln fan. And that means I watch every kick of every game and I feel every kick of every game. And it means something and it matters more when things don't go your way. It's impossible to be as objective as that opinion I've just shared when you're actually invested in the results, isn't it? But I think it's worth pointing out that like my head is saying it's going to be all right. Maybe not necessarily in this match, but just generally speaking over the next few weeks, things are going to be fine. We're going to get justification for those performance levels. But my heart says, yeah, but when? I really hope it's Saturday. But like I said, I would be absolutely delighted with a point in this match. I think a point would be a really, really good result. Anything more than that would be a huge bonus. I don't want to lose. I'm not going to say I'd be happy with a loss. If you were to ask me for a prediction, I think I would predict a narrow Huddersfield Town victory. But we've absolutely got it. We've got the skills required to not lose this game. I'm not 100% sure in this particular fixture whether we quite have the minerals to predict a win. So yeah, I'd obviously hope for one, but I think we have to be realistic. And yeah, probably predicting a narrow Huddersfield victory, but would 100% take a draw if you offer it to me now.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, all I'm going to say there is you're saying, there's a little bit of that kind of level of frustration in the fact that, or at least that kind of little bit of, in terms of the heart, in terms of the emotion of when's it going to come? Like, when is that win going to come? Feels a little bit like deja vu, because this time last year we were having these exact same conversations on the podcast. And all I'm saying is that last year, when it turned, and we had 16 games unbeaten on the bounce. So same again starting Saturday. Works for me.
Yeah, what I will say is our recent performances are better than they were this time last year. As much as the run is maybe similar in terms of points totals, the performances now are better than they were this time last year, when we were still probably trying to look at the positives at that point, in all honesty. So yeah, we're okay. But in terms of this individual fixture, it's going to be a tough one, but there'll be a good away following, I imagine. It's a good ground to go to, isn't it? It would be lovely just to maybe right some wrongs of what happened at Huddersfield Town's grounds many years ago. That would be nice. That is very much heart talking over head, though. So yeah, offer me a point, I'll take it. But you know what would be lovely? A 1-1 draw. Well, I love it would be a win. But if we're going to draw, let's draw with a last minute equaliser, so we leave feeling like a win. That'd be nice, wouldn't it?
So you really do want to go full on deja vu and have Wickham away style last minute equaliser,
You know what? If we do that and then that run turns itself around and we have a run, but it starts a month earlier, that'd be nice.
It would, wouldn't it? It would. I would quite happily take not losing until the start of April or middle of April, whenever it was when we lost at home to Wigan. But yeah, we could dream about it. It's going to be a great game no matter what. It might end up being two sides cancelling each other out, but who cares? It's going to be us away at Huddersfield, obviously in the league, and it's going to be enjoyable no matter what. For those that go, I'm sure they're going to very much enjoy it. I did Huddersfield just to kind of tick off the ground a couple of years back. Was actually quite impressed. First time I'd gone. So for those that do go, enjoy it. I will be inevitably curled up on the sofa watching it, rather hungover, because I am out on Friday night for the office Christmas party, and I will inevitably be drinking quite a bit. So I will probably be having some form of a hangover cure when I do watch the game at 3:00 on Saturday afternoon. But for everyone who does watch it, enjoy. It's going to be a great game no matter what. Chris, are you going this weekend, or?
I'm unable to. Finances is the only factor, really. It's so close to Christmas, and it's really difficult. I've got to pick and choose. So I'm going to go to the Bolton game on the 29th, but I can't go to this one. It was either or rather than both, sadly. So yeah, I'm going to go into Bolton, but sadly give this a miss, because it's a ground I haven't been to for a long time, and it's one that I penciled in as I'd like to go to at the start of the season. But yeah, money's a thing, annoyingly. So that's that.
I know that feeling. I don't think I'll be making any last-minute decisions to go this weekend like I did last week. So yeah, that one won't be on the cards for me either. But no, it'll be great. So enjoy those that go. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to tune in on Sunday when it will be somebody and somebody. I never remember to look at.
I think it's me and
Gaz. There you go. Take a listen to what they think of the game, and I will speak to you again just before Christmas, I think, is my next one on the rota. So enjoy and goodbye.